This week on Newsnight, the Florida House rolls out bills aimed at lowering taxes on homesteaded properties. We'll take a look at the proposals and discuss whether they meet Governor DeSantis' demands to put the elimination of property taxes to voters next year. Newsnight starts now. Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, Florida lawmakers have advanced a sweeping set of proposals aimed at cutting property taxes. Several measures filed by House Republicans are aimed at going some way towards meeting Governor DeSantis' demands for an overhaul of Florida's property tax system. Most would require voter approval on the 2026 ballot, setting up a debate in the upcoming legislative session over how to fund local services and what such a shakeup might mean for homeowners.
Why would we exclude the portion attributed to schools?
The legislature's been looking into the property tax issue during recent committee sessions, including a House Select Committee set up by Speaker Perez.
411 municipalities and 67 counties, and we're not seeing revenue go down at all. If anything, it continues to go up. Where is that money going?
There are now several proposals, most of which would require voter approval at elections in November next year. Those proposals include completely abolishing non-school property taxes on homesteaded properties, gradually eliminating non-school homestead property taxes over a 10-year period, exempting Floridians aged 65 and older from paying non-school homestead property taxes, creating a new exemption equal to 25% of the home's assessed value for non-school property taxes, adding a $100,000 exemption for homes with comprehensive property insurance coverage, removing the $500,000 cap on transferring accumulated Save Our Homes benefits when moving to a new home, limiting increases in assessed property value to 3% over 3 years for homesteads and 15% over 3 years for non-homestead properties, and making statutory changes, including requiring a 2/3 vote for local millage rate hikes and allowing newly married couples to combine Save Our Homes benefits up to $500,000. Save Our Homes, by the way, is a benefit that caps the annual increase in a homesteaded property's assessed value at 3%, or inflation, whichever is less. Well, I spoke about the property tax proposals this week with Kimberly Leonard, who writes the Florida Playbook for Politico.
Governor DeSantis has been pushing the legislature to do away completely with property taxes on main properties, what are known as like homestead properties where people are living. And that is not what the legislature, the House at least, has given him. Instead, what they put together were 8 different proposals that they say they're just going to pass onto the Senate and then have the Senate either narrow it down or pass them all and then say, hey, let's just let voters decide. The problem with what they've put together is that a lot of the proposals are contradictory. So one of them says that the property taxes would only be zeroed out for seniors. Another one says it's for everybody. Another one says it's just, to be phased out over 10 years. And they do not touch education funds. And again, that's different than what the governor has proposed. But I think it does show that when you start to write legislation on reducing or all out undoing property taxes, it gets really, really complicated. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing now. I mean, I had some people concerned that this meant that the House was actually trying to scuttle the entire effort. I don't know if that's true, but it doesn't really seem like an opening bid that the governor will welcome, although he has not talked about it yet.
I noticed that the Senate hasn't weighed in on this yet.
That's right. Senate President Ben Alberton hasn't said anything when we've asked his office whether he has a response. And he also hasn't really given any specificities on, what he would like to see out of property tax reform. Look, this is an issue that when I interview people comes up a lot. The governor has made it an issue. So this is something that I'm sure members of the Senate and the House are hearing about from their constituents. I just don't really know where it goes from here. They may all out reject it. They may start back from the drawing board, but it kind of seems like everyone's not on the same page. And that's where it gets a lot harder to actually get something on the ballot.
You've reported on those tensions between the House, the Senate, and the governor over property tax reform. We saw some of those divisions, of course, play out in the last session, particularly over immigration. I mean, how do you assess the lay of the land? Might we see some of those divisions reemerge?
Definitely. I mean, I sort of thought during the 2 weeks of interim committee meetings that maybe things were calming down. You know, we had seen President Trump endorse James Othmeyer for state attorney general. And I kind of thought, okay, well, now Republicans will probably, back off a little bit on the whole Florida investigation. Maybe they'll, just ease up some of the tensions that have been there just because they want to portray an idea of, okay, everyone's getting along. But as I started asking folks, I was hearing the exact opposite. One lawmaker texted me saying this is just the calm before the storm. And in fact, within an hour then, we saw the plan on property taxes, which again was a surprise and was not what the governor had asked for. So I do think it's going to be, I think, first of all, the wounds that were created during the last session have not healed. So those are going to reemerge. But the governor is also looking at, I think, going out with a bang. This is going to be his last legislative session. And the question, he got so used to basically asking for things and getting whatever he wanted from the legislature. And he still hasn't really adapted to one that has become, more resistant or less willing to kind of go along with things. And so it's been an adjustment for everyone, to kind of say the least.
Kimberly Leonard there from Politico. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. And joining us in the studio this week, Kirsten Delgado. She's the one that gets up early in the morning to bring you the news
Yes.
on WFTV Channel 9. Thanks so much for coming in, Kirsten.
My pleasure.
Good to see you. Jeff Allen from Spectrum News 13. Good to see you, Jeff.
Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. And Stephanie Rodriguez from WKMG News 6. You do a lot of stuff down in Osceola County.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Good to see you, Stephanie. Let me start with you, Jeff, on this one. I mean, Spectrum News has been talking a lot about property taxes of late, including these new proposals. I asked Kimberly Leonard, so I'll ask you too. What stands out to you from these proposals?
Yeah, well, our political reporter, Jason Delgado, he's really been there at the State House. They've been working a lot, and out of the session on this, House Republicans at least. The Senate hasn't dived into this quite, but they basically developed a 37-person bipartisan panel to look into these proposals. You laid them, some of them out there right off the top. There's 8 of them. A lot of them, they have exemptions for school, the school taxes, and funding for law enforcement. So they all have those in common, but they all kind of give people a break on their homeowners' property taxes in different ways. One of them gives up to a 25%, 1/4 of the worth of your home break, which would be more than what we homeowners see now. And one of them would give kind of $100,000 off the worth of the home that you have to pay taxes on. So it'll be interesting to see which one of these kind of rises to the top as they consider all of these options.
Well, as you mentioned there, the Florida House has been digging into this property tax issue in recent weeks. The Senate is expected to do the same. At this week's Orange County Legislative Delegation meeting, lawmakers addressed property taxes, including the House proposals and concerns over what they might mean for local government funding.
We all know that these proposals impacting property taxes will have major repercussions for emergency services, for fire, for so many of the critical government services that are provided here. We have to take our time to make sure that we fully research this issue, get all the feedback from stakeholders.
This is a big issue for everybody, large and small, fiscally constrained, non-fiscally constrained. I think folks with an expectation that if we cut property taxes, it's going to get rid of their bill and we don't address required local effort. Some folks are going to be very disappointed because we don't in a lot of these proposals. That's a big deal. Nothing that has been proposed so far prohibits a cost shift from municipalities going to fees instead of from taxes. A lot of these create a permanent funding obligation for law enforcement. But I think it's just such a large issue and it's so complicated in the state of Florida that we're still getting input from everybody.
Jason Broder there. Kirsten, WFTV has obviously covered this issue of property tax cuts and what it might mean for government spending, particularly for emergency services, law enforcement, other items that local governments pay for. It looks like law enforcement funding would be protected in these proposals, but generally speaking, what is the governor's call for cuts?
Waste, 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 right? Yeah. He's said about the CFO, Blaise Ingoglia, really focus on the waste. In Orange County specifically, there was an audit. We're still waiting on the findings of that audit, but he was saying to the tune of, hundreds of millions of dollars are being wasted. And frankly, this isn't a partisan issue. You do have even Democrats coming out and saying, hey, listen, there's an issue here. This is an exorbitant cost to what you're asking homeowners to do. And so, as you mentioned, I know Scott Randolph even said, 25% would be a huge help for these families. And when you look at, say, the economy, I think for the average person, they're going, oof, that bill is rough. But on the other side of that, how are we going to pay for these necessary things that we need in our environment, right? This necessary infrastructure. I don't want potholes outside of my house, right?
Yep.
So those things are going to start coming up if we don't actually talk the dollars and cents of where the money is going and who's going to pay for it.
Well, let's take a listen to Scott Randolph. We'll play another clip from this week's Orange County Legislative Delegation meeting. Scott Randolph, of course, the Orange County tax collector, had this to say. He's a Democrat.
Local government's property tax revenues are exploding because in the last 5 or 6 years, right, property values have exploded as well. But if you've been in your home before that time, your property taxes have been protected by Save Our Homes. I've lived in the house I've lived in for the last 10 years. My property taxes have gone up less than $1,000 in 10 years. If somebody purchased that home this year, they would pay double what I pay in property taxes. The issue I hope the legislature focuses on, again, isn't the total budget, it's the fairness issue. And Florida cannot continue to push property taxes onto new homeowners, whether they be new retirees from other states, or whether they be young people trying to buy their first home, or whether they be people, in the middle of their career coming to Florida for a new opportunity. If we don't address that fairness, we will kill the housing market. It happened in 2007, 2008.
Scott Randolph there, Orange County tax collector. Well, Kirsten just mentioned it a second ago. I talked with Kimberly Leonard about this. We'll put the full interview up on our website. But this doesn't necessarily seem to be a partisan issue, right, property taxes?
No, yeah. I mean, you have bipartisan support on this, but you almost have a division within the Republican Party in Florida between the governor and lawmakers as far as how far they want to go with this. These lawmakers are proposing those 8 different proposals. I don't think they go as far as the governor wants to go. The governor, wanted these breaks even in last year's legislative session. It looks like they've gotten serious about making something happen here, but will it be far enough for the governor? He really wants just across the board homeowners to not really have to pay anything from if you listen to how he's talked about this issue.
Yeah, well, local governments do seem pretty nervous about it, though, right, about cutting or potentially eliminating property taxes. News 6 actually put together a really interesting look this week at what these reforms will mean for local counties. What do you guys find, and what do we hear from counties broadly about this?
Well, as we can imagine, every county is going to have to look at the money that they get in from property tax, because no two counties are alike. So some counties might have more homesteaded properties than other, or they might have more commercial properties that wouldn't benefit from this tax reform. So that's money that these counties could still rely on that other counties potentially could not rely on if they have less commercial properties that wouldn't benefit from the tax reform. So they have to really look at how much money they're getting in from the properties that would be exempt potentially from paying property taxes and figure out how they're going to still pay for those required services, like she mentioned, that they have to do legally and that the community wants to see and that they are accustomed to.
Yeah.
So we're hearing a lot of counties say that, they won't be able to provide that level of service that they're accustomed to and that they want to provide to the community if they don't have those revenue dollars to rely on.
And of course, Mayor Jerry Demings in Orange County has talked a lot about, well, we need this extra revenue because we've seen such an increase in population. It's interesting, isn't it, Jeff, that school taxes are exempt from this. The governor hasn't talked about that being something that he wants.
Yeah, in fact, he's, obviously they've opened up, the vouchers and charter schools, that spending, and even now they're floating, possibly allowing, even school property to be taken up by private, educational facilities, So it's something that, he doesn't agree. He doesn't feel like schools are, necessarily the right, public schools are the right answer, and obviously he's opened up other options. So I don't think the governor's necessarily going to want to see that school exemption if this comes down to it. We could be looking at a special session here if it doesn't go as far as the governor wants.
Yeah, property taxes and millage rates, they make up such an important part of school districts' budgets.
Especially when you talk about not only school district budgets, but you're also talking about the unintended consequences of people. It's already difficult enough for the average person to afford a home, and now you might have rents go up as a result of this because of the fees for apartment buildings being impacted by this, potentially all of us being impacted, whether you're a homeowner or not, or a renter, with sales tax potentially being an option to kind of meet this need. So it's impacting everyone, whether you like it or not, whether you own a home, whether you rent. It's you're going to go to Walmart, you're going to buy a banana, and it's going to cost you 10 cents more,
Yeah.
So.
And to add to that, the Department of Revenue is reporting that right now 29 of 67 counties in the state of Florida can't afford the bills that they have with the property taxes that they're getting in right now. So that's going to leave them even more in the hole.
Those fiscally constrained counties, that's correct. I mean, sometimes lost in this discussion, and I'm glad that Kirsten brought this up, is the effect on homeowners and their pocketbooks. I wonder whether we know how the public actually feels about these proposals, about the idea of property tax elimination.
That's a great way to put it. People like the idea of not paying property taxes. There was a recent survey done that found that 65% of Floridians are in favor of tax reform, and they would vote yes on the ballot if it came before them during an election. Again, they like the idea of it. About 40% of those people surveyed said that they do agree that property tax is a vital or necessary form of revenue for the state, but they do feel that it should be limited in some capacity. And we got kind of an understanding as to why they would be on board with property taxes being removed or some reform there, because those same 65% are worried that they won't be able to continue living in the home that they currently own because of rising property taxes or rising housing costs.
Yeah, it's really true. I think if you ask people if they'd like to pay less tax, generally,
The answer is yes.
the answer is generally yes. I wanted to wrap up this segment by talking about another big cost that affects homeowners, and that, of course, is insurance here in Florida. The governor discussed the issue this week. Spectrum News 13 has been looking at what lawmakers are considering on insurance for the upcoming session. Do we know what, and do we know how the governor feels about it?
Well, yeah, homeowners, like you just said, those costs, insurance is another big cost they have. I mean, they're just looking for relief somewhere. The governor has already kind of put out the salvo and said, hey, don't mess with what we've been doing. The governor, the legislature, the last two cycles, their attack on reducing insurance costs has been by trying to get more insurers back into the state, especially when you look at homeowners insurance. And I feel like they've been able to do that by reducing the ability for people to sue these insurance companies. A lot of people see that as, oh, you're just giving the insurance companies a break, but they feel like that's been able to get more companies in here, more competition, keeping those costs down. In fact, the governor has touted what he says is historic reductions in auto insurance breaks. And so he's saying, hey, lawmakers, don't mess with what we're doing, because he feels like it's working.
Well, we'll see what lawmakers do when they get to Tallahassee in January. You can find links to the proposals from the Florida House on property tax reform on our website to read for yourself. It's all at wcf.org/newsnight. Okay, next tonight, immigration. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited Florida this week. In Bradenton, she pushed for stronger immigration enforcement and praised recent ICE operations in the state. Meanwhile, Florida's readying a third immigration detention center, this time in the Panhandle. The site, dubbed Panhandle Pokey, is expected to also hold detainees as part of Florida's effort to aid in the Trump administration's deportation effort. Well, last week on the program, we discussed how communities near Alligator Alcatraz view the facility there. So what about the other site, Deportation Depot, that's currently open in the small community of Sanderson in Baker County? I spoke after the facility's opening with Sarah James Ranter, a reporter with our public media colleagues at WUFT in Gainesville and Fresh Take Florida, who visited Sanderson to find out how residents there felt.
I think a lot of them felt that they were left in the dark, right? Whether they were, told by me when I approached them, or whether they had seen it on Facebook the day before I reached them. A lot of the community members were looking for some sort of local reaction, asking me like if the local county government had said anything or if they were involved in it. So I just feel a lot of the residents were sideswiped. Some residents were worried about what would happen if someone escaped. That was kind of the core safety reason when I had asked, well, what are your safety concerns? Well, I'm worried about what would happen if someone escaped. And the other half of them were worried about, the potential criminals. I mean, data from Syracuse University shows that over 70% of people nationally who are detained in these immigration detention facilities lack some sort of criminal conviction. So, from state policy, they're hearing, even locally amongst the community, they're hearing that, all of these detainees are criminals and that they're dangerous. And now this is really being brought to their forefront in their backyard. So the safety is not only surrounding their proximity, but it's also surrounding the detainees themselves.
Sarah James Ranter from WUFT and Fresh Take Florida. Kirsten, let me come to you first on this one. WFTV reported on the Homeland Security Secretary's visit to Florida this week. What did she have to say about the sort of federal-state cooperation that we've been seeing over recent months?
Well, she really held Florida as a shining example of cooperation with the Trump administration. She said that Florida is the most, a state that's enforced this the most. That's the 287G program, that relationship between local law enforcement being able to act as ICE agents. And she also made the additional point to say, you know, we're going after criminals here. That's the focus of these operations per the Trump administration. And in this case, we're bringing justice to these families associated with these crimes, whether that be drug cartels or murders, whatever, you know, whatever the case may be. And so for them, for her, it was an example of not only of Florida is doing the right thing and really going above and beyond of enforcement, but also bringing justice to families is the comparison she was making.
I mean, the state has been getting, and Kirsten mentioned those 287G programs, the state has been getting a chunk of money because of its cooperation with the federal government.
A very large chunk of money, Steve. $28 million, and then tacked on top of that is another $10 million for law enforcement. So, you know, no surprise that when the state announced that, they called it a historic agreement there. And as Kirsten mentioned, you know, Florida is really, really cooperating with the 287G. Right now, there's 325 agreements with local law enforcement agencies here in Florida to do the 287G program.
Yeah, they've really embraced that. I mean, we talked a lot on the program about Alligator Alcatraz. I think you and I have talked about it, Jeff. I mean, do we know, though, much about these plans for a third site in the Panhandle? I think Spectrum News has been covering that.
Well, you know, the state has not been exactly forthcoming with advanced details of the new facility.
Yeah.
I mean, Alligator Alcatraz seemed to come out of, you know, it was just kind of put up very quickly. So not a lot of details, but we do know that basically the state and the governor says we need another location. We know how large Florida is. I mean, it's, you know, from the Keys to all the way up to the Panhandle, many, many hours. So they feel like they need just another regional site. They have one in the South Florida, they have one in North Florida, but they feel like they need one in the Panhandle, essentially called Panhandle Pokey, just to kind of help with the processing of these individuals throughout the state. It's just geographic.
I mean, the governor has talked a lot, hasn't he, about the need to help the Trump administration with these plans or efforts because of what he would describe as the disastrous implementation of immigration policy under the Biden administration. But do we get an idea about how many migrants have been coming to Florida during the Biden administration? Do we know how the state has been affected in recent years by that?
Yeah, well, Florida officials, the governor, they have said they actually have the most in the country, more than California, New York, other large states than anybody else. And so they feel like that they have the most that they've processed through here. They've seen that already through their work, through Alligator Alcatraz, the people that they've processed, those migrants. And so they feel like this is something they're ground zero, basically, for what they see as a problem coming out of that last administration. And that's why they feel like they need to continue and expand their efforts.
Yeah. You've covered the immigration issue extensively this year, particularly those court fights, Stephanie, over temporary protected status that affects a lot of Venezuelans and Haitians in Florida. Do we know where things stand for the Venezuelan community at the moment legally?
Yeah, absolutely. Earlier this month, the Supreme Court granted an emergency request that was filed by the Trump administration to block a California judge's ruling that found that Kristi Noem, didn't follow the proper process when she repealed and revoked TPS for Venezuelans. So a major win there for the Trump administration as they're continuing to push to make sure that, temporary protected status is not an option available for Venezuelans anymore here in the state. They say it's always meant to be just that, temporary. But of course, advocates that I've spoke to, they say, hey, this is putting us at risk. We don't want to return back to Venezuela. It's not a great political climate. Mm-hmm. And then they call out hypocrisy and say the Trump administration knows that things are bad in Venezuela, and yet they still want to send us back there. So now hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who previously had work permits, and protection from deportation are now left without that.
And of course, a lot of discussion at the moment about what the Trump administration might be planning for the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro. I mean, do many people in Florida now fear the risk of deportation?
For Venezuelans specifically, we're talking about 600,000 across the United States. Half of that number, roughly, is here in Florida. Yeah. You're talking about folks who work in healthcare and infrastructure. And so there's also this kind of underlying impact of, well, what about the impact to the economy as a result of
the tourism
if we really,
industry.
Right, if we really get rid of all these people and send them back. Not only is it a safety concern, but it's also a concern to our local economy within the state, right? So it doesn't go into effect immediately, but this new ruling, as you mentioned, does allow the Trump administration to go down this path. They have the free way to do so. And so it is a concern, and it's one that a lot of people are watching closely.
And of course, major theme park operators are going to be watching to see what happens, because they've been reliant on TPS labor up until this point. Many Venezuelans on TPS, of course, are pursuing other immigration remedies, I guess. Asylum is one of those things. You actually recently spoke to a Venezuelan asylum recipient.
Yes, so she's been here for 10 years, her and her family. She is now a realtor. She was actually a psychologist. She had a degree in Venezuela. She was working. Her and her husband had a thriving life in terms of career. However, the economic situation around them wasn't a situation they could handle anymore. She gave the example of, even though she actually had the money, which is an issue, but for many people, for her it wasn't. She had a career, she had the money. She went to go buy her daughter milk. She said she stayed in line for about 3 hours to buy the milk, and by the time she got there to the front, there was no milk left. So now you have a shortage of nutrition. I couldn't feed my daughter. I had the money to pay for it. I couldn't feed my daughter. That was kind of the last step for her. And she moved here. She got asylum, and now she's a realtor. She couldn't use her degree here, of course. And so she was a babysitter. She did Uber Eats. She did everything under the sun, and finally became a realtor, and is having great success even in this economy with that. So it just goes to show that the American dream is alive and well if you truly work to pursue it, but you do need that level of entry, right? You do need that asylum in order to get to her point where you can have a successful life here in America.
Obviously, immigration is going to continue to be a big issue, both at the state and federal level. Be sure to find us on social media meanwhile. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us on X at Newsnight WUCF. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Kirsten Delgado from WFTV Channel 9, Jeff Allen from Spectrum News 13, and Stephanie Rodriguez from WKMG News 6. Thanks, guys, for coming in. Really appreciate it. Good conversation today. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.